Hi, welcome to creating high-impact coaching and mentoring programs within your company. I'm Donna Hamlin. Our firm has been working in companies across the globe in this whole area of developing talent for long-term growth in companies with cooperation with the HR leadership. I'm hoping today to share with you some of our experiences with this and to make some recommendations for those of you who have yet to put a program together along these lines, or maybe have one and would like to enhance or refine it. The goals today are to understand the value of coaching and mentoring to the overall success of a business, and to take a look at the role of HR in developing the key skills of managers to be able to contribute to this important professional development of their own talent in the organization. We'll discuss the plan of a process and an infrastructure that best offers coaching to others, and look at how to establish a program that helps coaches be well matched to the right recipients. We'll take a look at some of the processes for entering into a coaching assignment and discuss a little bit of the examples of coaching cases so that you understand what is important for managers to be trained in to be good at this. And finally, take a look at the measures that companies typically want to look at for valuing the return on investment based on what it's doing for the overall performance of the company. Why do companies do this at all? The research that's coming out now show a robust set of benefits of coaching and mentoring. One is it's considered a very cost-effective way of developing talent within the organization, more cost-effective than bringing in trainers to teach in the classroom. There are metrics now showing that it's increasing the efficient rate of business success, that there's an increased return on investment for a larger audience than just the employees, going to stakeholders, suppliers, etc., people who are part of the overall system. There's data showing improved productivity, improved morale in relationships, partly because there's more time spent by the managers with the individuals as opposed to overseeing operations. There's a greater creativity that's being applied because people, as they get more competent, get smarter about how to do things. There's a more effective use of resources and a higher increase of ideation and innovation. That's certainly a pretty rambunctious list of reasons to at least take a look at a program. What we do know, though, is when we plus the people, we plus the organization. Even if you have an organization that you think might be in jeopardy of a restructuring, or a line of a company that may be sold off, anytime you plus the people, you're doing something good for the longer term. Even if these employees go someplace else, it means the value of the company is higher because the competencies have gone up. You can't go wrong by investing in your people. I'd love to have an interactive discussion on this, but webinars don't allow for it. But I would encourage you to try this with your senior executives. Ask them to identify any time they had a really helpful coaching experience themselves, and contrast that to one that was terrible. I think all of us have had some kind of feedback along the way where it was so helpful and we were better for it, and then had some that was so disappointing and disillusioning that you just got depressed. And when you know the contrast between these two, and then you realize as a manager, part of the job is to be the one that's fulfilling and helping, then people sit up in their chair to learn what does it take to become a master at that. A first step is clarifying for people the difference between mentoring and coaching, because oftentimes those words are used interchangeably and they're not the same thing. Coaching is about skills and knowledge and how we get them. And while it can involve some discussion about personality and personal psychology a little bit, the main focus is about professional development. It's a little bit like one-on-one teaching, and it does acknowledge that there's a formal relationship between two people, although it might be more than two, for the purposes of learning something. The parties do acknowledge that there's a relationship, and they are focused on trying to challenge, support, and increase professional performance. The emphasis is about trying to find the highest caliber of qualities an individual can reach. And it is a learning process, and both sides understand that. Mentoring is different. It can include some discussion around the professionalism of the individual, but it's much more transformational and is tied more to the longer-term context and history of the way a person evolves and grows. To introduce a mentoring program in your organization would require a lot more skills and training in what I'd call clinical psychology. And while you may have some people who are keen for that, or some people who already have certifications or credentials for that, because it's more akin to counseling, organizations tend to do that one later, if at all. Just to be clear about some of the distinctions in detail about these two, coaching tends to be task-oriented, whereas mentoring is more relationship-oriented and can cover a much longer period of time. Coaching could run 6 months to 9 months to maybe a year, whereas mentoring could be a lifelong experience. I was given a mentor when I first went to work at GE, and he stayed my mentor for 45 years. That's a blessing. Coaching is performance-driven, whereas mentoring is more about development. Coaching oftentimes, most often, has the immediate manager as the critical partner, whereas mentoring can involve someone outside the company altogether, or somebody indirectly tied to the individual from another part of the company altogether. Companies tend to evaluate coaching for the return on the investment, whereas mentoring is so qualitative and so long-standing and does not rely on a lot of statistics that it's very hard to quantify and tends not to be. Coaching relies on assessment tools and performance reviews. Mentoring may use no tools at all. Mentors oftentimes just start with a story. In coaching, the feedback is given to the manager, whereas with mentoring, it's usually much more private and is not discussed with the direct supervisor at all. In coaching, the focus is primarily on whatever the capabilities of the individual are to deliver against the business performance. So the scope of the competency model that's looked at is tied to the business. Whereas in mentoring, it's broader than that. It balances some of the business competencies needed with some of the personal ones. And in a coaching model, the coach can be the manager, the direct manager of the person, whereas mentors are outside the direct reporting line. And while coaching emphasizes behavior, mentoring emphasizes psychology. In either case, however, coaching and mentoring are both about challenging and supporting an individual, which requires giving the gift of time and presence to an individual. And for those managers who are naturally gifted at doing that, find them, because they will be the best role models for introducing the program. Another thing to clarify is the difference between performance management and developmental coaching, because oftentimes people are confused about where those fit or don't fit. In performance management, which is typically done either biannually or annually, the manager owns the process, whereas in developmental coaching, the employee does. If an employee wants a coach, the employee decides what he or she would like as the competencies to develop. In performance management, the focus is typically based around the MBOs that are set from year to year, whereas in developmental coaching, it can be the skills and the leadership development the employee wants tied to a career path beyond that year. In performance management, the goals are manager-driven, whereas in developmental coaching, they're employee-driven. In performance management, assessments are used against the annual activities that are required, whereas in developmental coaching, you might use 360 assessments or leadership competency assessments to get a more rounded view of the person regardless of the job that he or she's in. And as for output in performance management, performance ratings, potential increase in compensation, and promotability are metrics. And in developmental coaching, it's the development plan itself and whether the individual accomplished it, and whether that has value or benefit to the career path possibilities or changes for that individual. Not every coach is going to be gifted in all the many ways a coach can serve. It's a robust word because coaches come in lots of different shapes and sizes, and their roles can be wide, as this list implies. A coach can be an expert who has deep domain knowledge in an area, and someone who wants to understand that area can go and get help specifically on that. A coach can be a thinking partner, just to think out loud on something that's going on so that the person can learn how to think a different way. A coach can provide feedback. A coach can also interpret feedback that someone's received. My daughter had her first summer job this year, and she took the initiative to have her boss give her some feedback. She wanted to know how she was doing. And part of what the boss said to her, she didn't understand, but she was too embarrassed to say, "I don't understand." So she came and asked me, and because I have a longer context of understanding her, and of course I know coaching, I could explain it to her in a different way so that she understood it and it made sense. That's a form of interpreting other people's feedback. A partner in dialogue just to think out loud on things is invaluable for the coaching role, and so is it true about practicing. Many coaches help coachees when they have to put together a slide deck and give a presentation, and can help them with some feedback on how it's going, pacing, style, executive presence in front of the room. A coach can also be a good person to talk to about accountability if there's an ethical issue, an integrity issue, an issue of conscience that needs to be discussed. Coaches are important for reinforcing and affirming when things are going better. A coach is a good counselor. Oftentimes coaches serve as a historian if they have a longer, deeper history of the business and can help explain the context in which things are taking place and why. And certainly they can be a role model for people who are trying to learn how to do something in a new way. Now, I'd be surprised if anyone listening today doesn't see some form of informal coaching that goes on, because many managers do that naturally, and that would be an informal way of coaching where it's far less structured. They just grab a moment when they see something and they give some feedback and help someone that may be stuck in the moment. But the trend now is to start to look at, can we formalize this both by process and by skill set so that it's assumed as part of everybody's package, if you will, when they go to work within a company. There's a definite shift in the use of managers' time today. 30% of the time is moving towards this assignment of time spent coaching direct reports on their personal talent development. So it's really now about getting things done better through others by building the competencies of others, rather than critiquing and overseeing the operations and sorting out the errors made by people who have not been coached enough to become competent. So the distribution of time is for the investment in overall performance improvement. The professional development framework that we see for this is that if you're going to bring something like this into the company, think about who should be the first recipient for it. It oftentimes is a function of identifying the high potential candidates within your organization that show a capability for growth, or it could be people who are already tagged in the succession plan as the people to take over if someone's left the company or gotten hit by a bus. If you identify the ones you think that are the most important candidates for the investment, then it's important to choose who's going to be mapped with whom for coaching. That matchmaking part is critical. And a key to this is that you at least have somebody on your HR team that is assigned as the person who is the discerning talent for who should coach who. Then there's a set of processes that take place for evaluating the managers so you actually know who's good at what for coaching and who needs development skills in certain areas of coaching, and then an assessment for the individual who's to be coached, and then meeting with the certified coach to review the findings so that the coach can help the coachee with a one-year development plan. Knowing that the two of them will participate once a month to review the plan and the activities in it. And the coach may or may not meet with other executives, but the spirit of that would be to ensure the support for any of the activities that the coachee is trying to accomplish that would be in the plan. Typically, a plan will include some activities that the individual just does on his or her own. And then there may be some group activities. For example, someone who needs skills in team leadership may be assigned to be the leader of a task force that crosses functions within the company to demonstrate the skills of team leadership are in place. And then some of the time will be just strict working between the coach and the coachee. No matter what, though, you can see here that the role of the coach or the mentor is critical to success. The investment in coaching is definitely growing across companies, and it's typically led by HR as the voice of reason for talent development. And the responsibilities here are system-wide as well as acumen-wide, creating the infrastructure for the program delivery, training the managers in the coaching and mentoring skills, identifying the best assessment tools, establishing and documenting the policies and processes that are going to go in place, the communication activities with the managers and the employees over time to reinforce that that program is dynamic and successful, serving as the matchmaker for who's going to work with whom, also serving as a broker if there are actions that need to be taken. For example, some person in an individual plan may have to do a job rotation into another function. That's typically HR's role to broker that assignment. HR ensures that the agreements are complete and in place. They will add the systems for storing and organizing all the data. We recommend a new one that's out now called Coaching Zone by Air Consulting, which is a library that keeps all of this current and organized so that you can look it up. It also helps you with storing dashboard statistics so that at any time you can push a button and see where the performance and the return on investment is. And finally, HR monitors the results and the impact both on the individual and the company's success. If you're looking at your company today and deciding whether this is right for you, the first thing I'd recommend is that you look at whether you think the company talent at the top is sincere about the role of developing people as it relates to business success. If you think it's rhetoric and not sincere, you probably have more education to do before you would want to launch a program. If it seems to be an earnest want of the organization, then that's a good thing. You won't be educating as much as you will be architecting. Next, take a look and see if you have a natural leader within the senior executive team who is an advocate that can, with credibility, promote and introduce the value of this program as you go forward. And then try and do an assessment of your own about whether you think the managers are ready for this role shift. How much training are they going to need to be competent at this? Or have they come from other places where they've already received some of that and they're ready? Or is it a mix? And if it's a mix, who would be your best role models to lead? If you feel you're reasonably ready, then you can move more into the architectural side, which is the plan, engaging the managers in the design, preparing and training them, drafting the policies and programs, and then launching with a beta. My recommendation is to take a look at the high potentials typically because they're the most eager to learn up, and you'll get some excitement and energy around a program that focuses on them. Of course, the communication is going to have to be developmental in the beginning, but carry forward. It's a continuing oversight. People, when they look at new programs, are a little skeptical about whether this is an event as opposed to a real process. And if you continue the communication for the years going forward, it becomes part of your culture. And then you've got some brand value with it. And finally, you'll be overseeing the evolution of it and the performance of it. Let's take a look at what you're taking on when you do this. Clearly, it's a relationship-based format. It's all about people and people working with other people. And we see this in 4 different spectrums, if you will. One is really good assessment diagnostics for the baseline. And then the second part is the coaching process, which actually challenges individuals and supports them while they're being challenged. And finally, what do you get at the end of the day for having invested the time in this, which would be the results? So if we take a look at assessment first, and there are many tools out there, so the first trick is to match the right tool with what you think is going to work with your company culture and the needs for the individuals. But no matter what tool you use, there is a focus on a person's performance in the context of a role, but also in the context of professional career ambitions of the individual going forward. No matter what tool you use, it should look at what are your strengths today as a baseline, and then what gaps are there against those. So there are examples of assessment tools that you can take a look at. One is for looking at overall competencies and job fit. Profiler XT, which is an individual assessment. Acumen looks at styles of thinking and orientation to task versus people, and it is a 360, so you can include colleagues, subordinates, customers, boss, all in the feedback loop. Vitals is an individual assessment, and then you can always complement any of those tools with qualitative interviews, where someone will check to see from colleagues with whom the coached person is familiar, to get some real stories of what it's like to work with the person, which oftentimes brings home some points in a more understandable way. If we just take a look at the Vitals tool as an example, so that those of you who've not worked with tools like this before might just get a sense, that one says that there are 4 styles in a typology of orientation to problem solving. One is that we are action-based. We go for results. Another is that we might be process-based, which is we tend to think about how to get things done and the steps and the protocols to it. Another is that it might be what should be done and why, which tends to have more of a challenging question about the creativity of getting results in new ways. And the last is how it should be done by whom, which is much more thinking about composition of talent and teams. Now, we all have some of these, but when we look at this on a typology diagnostic, we tend to have one dominant style and maybe a secondary style that goes with it. So a tool like this identifies among these 4 styles what a person may have as a dominant style, and then on the basis of that, look at, through a series of questions that are asked, is the dominant style a healthy one or a dysfunctional one? Because when we're under stress, we may take our strength and push it so far it becomes our weakness. And the tool will give a report that says, all right, this person's dominant style might be a challenger type or achiever type or accomplishment type, but when under stress is charged and creates gaps, and there are areas for change, and the report will identify those and give a guidance to the coach on what to work on. This just shows a visual map of how the data would show up on a summary chart to see if a person is in a healthy side, they're on the green side of the map. And in this case, you can see one that's identified as a regulator, and the secondary is uniting. So that's a person who's very much about process and very good with working with people about processes. A contrast to that is when you're looking at stress. We very seldom see people who just through a raw diagnosis are in the red zone already. That's more typical of people when they're under stress. So you may be perfectly functional, but having a period of stress where you resort to patterns that are dysfunctional. So if we take the example of someone who's accomplishing things and is under stress suddenly, or an organization that's gotten under stress because of some severe things that are going on, the tendency of an accomplisher is to think that the answer under stress is to work even harder, and they become a workaholic. And the coaching is about teaching them, no, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter so that you're not so stressed. So understanding the default stress profile helps you with the coaching model itself. Another thing to look at with these tools is to see which of those have a group profiling capability to them. So in this case, if you were working with a team where 5 people work together and you want to look at the team profile for the performance overall, the group potential can be mapped, and then you can work with the team to see what things could be done to improve their productivity, their collaboration, their coping with high change, or smaller things around problem solving, or even managing conflicts. No matter what tool you use, though, the crux of the solution rests with the capability of the coach. We do know from the Gallup studies that the #1 reason that people stay with a company is they love their boss. So the loyalty to the boss is tied to knowing or believing that the boss truly cares for the personal growth and development and success of that individual. The coach approach has to show credible rapport, a deep commitment to the individual, and a willingness to collaborate in this learning rhythm. No matter what assessment tools you pick, we highly urge you to make sure that the managers get certified in the use of the tool and how to interpret it so that they can guide from it well. We also recommend that the HR team get trained in it so that they can carry that assessment interpretation forward or collaborate with a manager. And if you're using outside professionals, that they are certified in the tools that you've chosen. It also holds true that if you're going to hire somebody in HR, that they should come with those credentials as a screening criteria for a higher and better hire than you might otherwise look at. If we move away from assessment, where a baseline's been established and now you know that you're going to be working on how do we challenge this person to grow, there are opportunities to look at obstacles in their way. How do we stretch them? Are they taking on something they've never done before and it creates anxiety or disequilibrium? And are there options for problem solving they've never considered before? All of those are ways to create a challenge that helps people to grow professionally and to build their confidence. Another component is to support them while they're doing all of these things that are new. So some of that is about motivating them. Some of it is about securing the resources they need. It may be that they need to think out loud about the approach or the strategy. It could also be that you help them when they feel discouraged because of a setback, and you affirm them when they're doing great. And you keep reminding them that this is a lifelong process. This is not an event. And if we take the last component of the Venn diagram that we had, taking a look at the results is critical. What changes occur in the organization as a result of this program? I wouldn't recommend looking at the changes until 6 months in at the earliest, because it takes time for it to be acculturated. Then take a look at, are you seeing competencies that are demonstrably better? And then you might look at some metrics around, what do people say about themselves? Do they feel like they're growing? Do the managers see that the person's growing? What does a team review say about productivity and performance? Are there higher numbers of individuals in the succession plan that are classified as ready now? What do the promotability scores look like for people? And if you're doing anything in the way of employee attitude surveys or focus groups where you can get some sense for whether employee engagement is higher or morale is higher or satisfaction with the boss is higher, that is good indication that the programs are playing out well. One of the things that's important is, what are you going to train the managers about so that they master these skills? And the process of coaching is the first, that they understand that it starts from an agreement between two parties, and it has to be built around observations by the coach of the coachee that induce a conversation around things that they could consider doing differently, doing better, experimenting with, and then following up on the attempts that the coachee does to make a change. So part of the mastery skills is to train the managers on how you establish the coaching relationship, how you recognize the opening for the dialogue, how you actually convert observations to communication without them being judgmental, and then how that translates to designing actions for change that get the coachee excited enough to try it, and then converse about it as they experiment. If we take the assessment tool as the baseline and say, all right, this is the present state of the individual, and then the discussion is with the coachee to say, where do you want to be a year from now? The trick of the coach is to master and identify the critical actions that this person can take that bridge the gap. Now, we strongly train our managers around asking questions as opposed to providing the answers. And our rule is 3 to 1. If you're asking 3 times more questions than you're giving suggestions, you're probably on your way to some good coaching. And that's important as a function of what you put into your training for your managers. Observation is hard to master. It's easier to slide to judgment after we see something and just critique it. So we emphasize this as part of this training. A coach observes the behavior, states the behavior, and then discusses it. We do a lot of exercises to get people involved with that. There's one called I See, I Imagine, I Feel. But the loop is to keep reminding the managers not to conclude, but to inquire. There are a number of books out now about appreciative inquiry which emphasize that, and we'd encourage you to incorporate that into your program, because the quality of a question could be the win or the lose in the process. For example, if we ask a team, how can we reduce stress at work? The brain of the person who's asked goes to stress, and what they think about is negativity. If you flip the question and say, how can we create excitement in our workplace? The brain has to go to the positive. It automatically goes to where you want it to go, which is ideation and creativity about the problem. And training managers to ask questions that are in the positive is a critical success competency. We do call it the flip, and appreciative inquiry specialists use this all the time, to listen carefully to a complaint or a problem and repeat it. So, yes, I understand that you think this is a problem. What is it that you'd like to see instead? Which turns people's heads around to think in the positive, and then you can coach much more effectively with that in mind. Another thing to include in your program is helping the coaches to understand how to offer feedback. So if you take a situation like this where a manager of a sales team is observing Kim, and the technique here is to note the observation, describe why that observation is important to the business, and then make some suggestions that might expand or improve. So if you follow that order, you're going to get more value for the coaching than if you simply make the suggestion, which is what oftentimes managers do. They cut to the chase. Another thing to build into your program is how to teach the coaches to handle pushback when people are getting feedback they don't like to hear. And there are a number of different ways to do that. This chart tries to outline a few of them. The important thing here is you don't have to have these answers. You have to make sure that the coaches do, so that they can do the best job and that the coachee walks away feeling like they got true value from someone who cares. Another thing that's important about this is to be realistic with your managers about what their capability and rate of mastery will be. We do not recommend that coaches coach beyond their own capability. And every now and then you are going to find people that are wanting a coach who actually have problems that fall more in line with what is required of clinical psychology or long-term mentoring. And if a coach understands where that line is and can refer it back to HR, then your job in HR is to help that person in another way. Because we're all born with different qualities. We come from different races, different languages, different customs, different cultures. Sometimes we cannot necessarily cross-culturate and coach well. And if we automatically step into a diverse world of work like we have today, the coaching encourages us to explore different views, but we need to feel open-minded about that ourselves to be a good coach. And a good coach can help somebody become much more worldview oriented and much more flexible in thinking and less defensive if they're open to ideas that go beyond their boundaries. If coaching is done well, we all become better human beings. Another thing to build into your program is making sure that you're documenting the agreements for the coaching before you begin. Consider what the scope will include, and that should be as detailed as you can possibly make it to hold feet to fire for both parties. What the roles will be, what the processes are. Not everybody wants to be coached the same way. Some people like coaching after work. Some people like coaching on the weekends. Some people like it by Skype. Some people like it in face-to-face. Working out the working relationship itself is the first step. And then agreeing on what will it look like at the end of the day in an ideal state would be the success ambition for the plan. And documenting that is important. HR should be the library for these documents so that you can call upon them at the end of the year and take a look at them together with your partners, the coach and the coachee. So this should not be done by the coach, and it should not be done by the coachee, and it should not be done by HR. It should be done by the three of you together to make sure that there's full participation and that any concerns are documented and resolved before you begin, and that there's a handshake to what everybody understands is going to happen as a function of this. I also recommend that, because some people get so enthusiastic they want to develop 16 competencies in 1 year, that as an HR leader you tone that down and make sure that the coach and the coachee have a realistic 1 or 2 skills that they're going to emphasize. If it's thought of more as a ladder of building, where take 2 skills, next year take another 2 skills, next year take another 2 skills, you will see much more grounded work and outcomes than if you try and spread too thin and then develop very little. It's also important to check in on the process itself, because the plan will get documented and the monthly check-ins are against the actions in the plan, but it's good to check on the process to see if a coach is saying after 3 months, how is this going? Are there any things you want to change? It's showing concern for the coach becoming a better coach. It's also true that a relationship like this is dynamic, and it may be that in the beginning a coachee wants to meet face-to-face because they're building the rapport, but after 3 months they're perfectly comfortable with a Skype call. And checking to see if those shifts are going to be fine or you want to experiment in some way is a good way of showing that you're still very engaged in the process as much as the transactions themselves. And then finally, the HR leader has to be the strongest PR agent possible for the success and the value of this program. And that has to do with the defensibility of the return on investment. Not every company is tracking this kind of data, and I understand if you may not be, you may want to have to hone it down to just a few, but here are some that we look at and recommend. If you've got data to take a look at the promotability rate of people in the company, that would be a good metric. Employee retention can often be, unless you're in one of those cultures that is restructuring, and by design, retention is a non sequitur. Looking at employee satisfaction is a good metric if you key in certain questions that are tied to how strong is my manager as a coach, how satisfied am I with the coaching that I'm getting, which are standard Gallup questions in employee surveys. Taking a look at performance review improvement to see if scores are actually going up. It would be good if you're tying anything to your strategic planning processes around productivity improvement or organizational performance improvement within functions that are within your MBOs anyway, and see if there's a contribution or a correlation tied to this coaching and competency set that goes with it. It's also interesting to take a look at the culture and see if it's changing in any way. We see that where the coaching and mentoring programs exist, that the culture becomes much more helpful, and that team building and teamwork go up. And if you start to hear language changing in the culture because of that, you can count on that coming in part from the values that are ascribed to a belief in coaching in the first place. It'd be great to take a look at your corporate brand as well. If you are announcing to the outside world and new prospective hires and your supply chain of people that you have instituted a program like this, it will extend to the brand a belief that your company is investing in its people. And that could be a real swing in your marketplace. And we strongly recommend that you take a look at putting together a routine dashboard that whatever metrics you're using are presented at every QBR or every key monthly staff meeting so that you can share with the senior team what kind of progress is accruing as a function of it. We are strong believers that the senior executive team owns the asset of the high potential candidates and the succession candidates. That talent pool is a corporate asset, but they're in charge of it. So they should be apprised of the progress they're making in the value of that to the bottom line of the organization. And then you can always advertise and promote around the investment in that type of program to prospective hires and the rest of the organization to keep it dynamic and exciting for everybody involved. If you've never put a program like this together, or even if you have, we don't recommend that you oversell it. Coaching is a skill and it evolves with time, and so please remind people that it takes experience and commitment to become a master. You just don't do it overnight. So set realistic expectations with your managers and show that you're investing in them to become good at it over time just as much as they're investing in their people. Try and find the best role models you can to lead the beta, because that's confidence-inducing and will help the rest of the organization to say, this is worth a try and maybe I'll become good at it with experimentation too. And we strongly encourage you to get some outside professionals to help you with selecting the assessment tools, helping with the overall design. There are lots of good drafts of overall programs, so you don't have to start from scratch. And making sure that you're getting the right certification of managers as coaches. And then if you're going to hire anybody that comes on board within your HR team, look for someone who has credentials to provide this internally, because it's just a little extra that you can bring to the team as opposed to someone who would have to yet get certified. We hope that your programs are as successful as the many that we've seen over the years in 42 countries that we've done this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and ask for a little guidance. Thanks so much for listening today.